6 roommates go out partying in pairs of 2. That night, each group returns home about half an hour apart from each other. The house has 3 floors and each group lives on a different floor of the house. In the morning, 4 of them are murdered. Who did it? There's been a lot of confusion and mystery surrounding the Moscow Massacre in Idaho. 4 young adults gone too soon. Currently no suspects identified or no murder weapon has been retrieved. A town who's unsure if they're currently still in danger. A police force who seems to be flip-flopping with the information they're giving out to the public. There seems to be a lot of internet sleuths or digital detectives trying to crack the case. A lot of message board theories seem to be floating around social media. My aim is to go through those theories and try and mellow them out with facts and logic, but in order to do that, we should probably start from the beginning. Moscow is a town located in northern Idaho, right on the border of Washington state, with a population of about 25,000. You could call it a small town. Moscow plays host to the University of Idaho, where our victims attended school. 6 college students would lease a 3-story house off campus. Kaylee Gonclaves, 21. She had been childhood friends with Madison. Madison Mogan, 21, childhood friends with Kaylee. Xana Kernodle, 20, who was dating Ethan. Ethan Chapin, 20, dating Xana. Bethany Funk, one of the survivors. And Dylan Mortensen, the other survivor. This photo of the 6 roommates was taken on November the 12th, hours before the murder. The last time they'd all share a picture together. That night, the 6 of them would all go out partying, albeit not at the same location. They would break off into groups of 2. Bethany and Dylan would go out to an undisclosed location, returning home at around 1 a.m. on November the 13th, going to bed on the 1st floor. Xana and Ethan would go to a party just a few streets over at Ethan's fraternity, returning home at around 1:45 a.m., going to bed in a shared room on the 2nd floor. Kaylee and Madison had gone to a local bar downtown called the Corner Club. They'd leave the bar at around 1:30 and make a pit stop at a food truck nearby. The food truck also happened to be Twitch streaming, so that interaction is caught on camera, the last known video of the 2. After getting their food, they'd call a ride-sharing service like Uber. Kaylee and Madison would get home around 2 a.m. and go up to the 3rd floor to Madison's room, where they would both fall asleep at some point. Kaylee would call her on-again, off-again boyfriend Jack Zucar 7 times between 2:26 and 2:52 a.m., though none of the calls had been answered as Jack had been sleeping at the time. And according to law enforcement, somewhere between 3 and 6 a.m. that morning, the killer would infiltrate the home on the 2nd floor through a sliding door, make his way through the house, murdering Xana, Ethan, Madison, and Kaylee. At the time of recording this, there has been no solid suspect released by the police. The murder weapon has been theorized to be some sort of large hunting knife, a K-bar style knife, though there was no murder weapon found at the scene of the crime. There seems to be confusion online by the lack of evidence being disseminated by the police, but for a case like this, it's actually fairly standard. If you're trying to hunt down a criminal, it's better not to tip them off that you're almost on their case. Releasing evidence to the public could very easily complicate things further for the police. Kaylee had a dog that lived with them at the house, and there are also reports that a few weeks prior to the murder, Kaylee had mentioned to friends and family that she thinks she may have had a stalker. People really seem to be enamored with this case, and honestly, I could see why. Feels like the plot of a movie or the start of some weird riddle. 6 roommates go out partying in pairs of 2. That night, each group returns home about half an hour apart from each other. Each group lives on a different floor. In the morning, 4 of them are murdered. Who did it? There are many questions surrounding the murder. If Bethany and Dylan survived, how did they not hear anything? How did Kaylee's dog not bark if there was an intruder? And who is the hooded man? So let's start going through these theories one by one. How didn't Bethany and Dylan hear anything? According to Fox News, they had interviewed a previous tenant. Allegedly, that tenant had lived in the same house in 2019 before the 6 roommates had leased it. According to them, the walls were actually quite thick and sound didn't do a very good job at traveling between floors. They said, quote, "I wouldn't have heard it from downstairs." So the question would be, how did the 4 victims not hear the others were getting murdered? We can confirm that at least 2 of the victims were fairly drunk going to bed, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that they were not able to hear anything. The other 4 housemates, including the other 2 victims, had all also gone out partying, so it is possible that that played a big factor into all of this. Out of the victims sharing rooms, though, the question is, how did one victim not hear the other one getting murdered? Perhaps they did and they just didn't react quickly enough because they were confused, they didn't know what was going on, or perhaps their brain went into fight or flight and they just froze, just not really knowing what to do. People react very differently under stress, so unless if we were there, there's no way for us to really tell at this time. The killer would have had to have been fairly diligent as well, moving from room to room fairly silently. But at the end of the day, generally the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Thick walls and drunk individuals half asleep played a huge factor, most likely. The choice of weapon from the killer is fairly interesting to me here. It is much more silent than using something like a firearm, perhaps indicating that this is premeditated. It also could very well be that it was just the most readily available tool that they had at their disposal. Either way, killing 4 people room to room with people physically struggling back against you, most likely, is a difficult task to pull off, yet it was done. Anything you currently see online about it is just speculation for the time being, so I would take it all with a grain of salt. How did Kaylee's dog not hear anything? So a popular take that I see online about the dog is people saying that this obviously means that the killer would have to be somebody that the dog knew that the dog was comfortable with. Why didn't the dog bark to wake everybody up? If you read through all the reports that the police have released to date, you'll see that though the dog was there when the police arrived, there's no evidence that the dog was at the scene of the crime. The dog was found in a room that had nothing to do with the murders, and there were other people at the home when the police arrived. If all 6 of them had been going out that night, perhaps Kaylee had given the dog to a friend or a family member to watch for the night, and they had come over to get the dog back to Kaylee, and then that's when the murders were discovered, and that's when the 2 surviving roommates and whoever else was there had called 911. Perhaps because Bethany and Dylan got home first, they took the dog downstairs and the dog had slept with them that night. Or maybe it's a young dog and Kaylee had put it in a cage because they didn't want it destroying their furniture while they were gone. Police did say that they checked the dog for any evidence pertaining to any of the crime scenes, but the dog came back clean. It seemed like it had not been around at the time of the crimes. So trying to pursue this theory of the dog is a loose end. Who is the hooded man? The hooded man is another reference I constantly see online. The hooded man is actually another classmate of the 6 of them. His name is Jack S. I'm not going to say his full name. So Jack is seen on video in the background while the girls are getting food at the food truck. So if you watch the video here, it appears as if he's kind of stalking them in the background and lurking about. The cops have interrogated him, but they marked him off. Some of the victims' family members and people online seem to think that the cops kind of marked him off as not a suspect a little too early, that they think his actions on camera seem a little suspicious. But if we go through the video, it doesn't seem that way to me at all. He's standing around them with a hood on, not really interacting with them, so yes, it can look shady, but it was also fairly cold out that night. It's not unreasonable for him to have a hood on. Clearly, Kaylee and Madison were fairly drunk. You can see them stumbling, specifically Kaylee, quite a bit. But if you watch the whole video, you do see Jack interacting with them at some point, as well as someone that the 2 girls also seem to know. It all seems fairly normal to me. Allegedly, Jack is friends with Madison's boyfriend, so it is very possible that he was just keeping an eye on these 2 drunk girls, trying to make sure they get home safely. ironic. But what I think gets overlooked fairly often with people's opinions on Jack is the first few seconds of the video. As the girls are appearing on screen, Jack is kind of in the middle of them. It seems like he was with them, like he was part of their party. They're ordering food, he doesn't want anything, he kind of is backing off. They seem a little drunk. He might be sober and it's just letting them do their thing because he just wants to get home. Maybe he's a little annoyed. And as time goes on, he meets his friend. They talk with the girls a bit. The girls take off. I've seen some people say, well, that seems odd. Why did the girls leave in one direction and he leave in another? But if you remember earlier, as I mentioned, the girls had called an Uber. So perhaps he was just waiting for them to get in the Uber so he could take off. In my opinion, Jack's interaction with the girls that night, at least the portion we saw on video, seemed fairly normal. People were speculating that Jack, the hooded man, is the stalker we would hear about from the mainstream news, but that is unconfirmed. Allegedly, the police had looked into 2 suspects who they thought were the stalker, but they have also been scratched off the list. For the time being, that's all that's known, unfortunately. This was a tragic event that took the lives of 4 young individuals far too early. Bye.